That's Sonic Youth with Cool Thing. I think that starts us out right here. Hi, I'm Madame Maledicta, and as promised, it is an entirely new, brand new episode of Rooted. On Tuesdays here on Eardrum Buzz on Rooted, we explore the roots of where music has been, where it's going, where it is now, and just generally an overview of past, present, future. So hi. All right, so I got to start off here with Sonic Youth. The entire episode this morning covers SubPop, and yeah, Sonic Youth isn't a SubPop band. However, they're tied in really closely with SubPop. Do you know, for years and years, I thought that Sonic Youth was on SubPop. Wait, why? Because I remember when Sonic Youth did some stuff for the SubPop Records compilations. Yeah. It's been that long that I've been admiring this music, yeah. So I remember Sonic Youth being tied in with them. But in reality, they're an SST Records and DGC Records company. Those David Geffen labels were the ones that Sonic Youth was signed to, and they were traditionally New York City noise pop. They were not as tied to Seattle. However, if you look into it these days, they say that they have a deep affinity with Seattle. And note that Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth and Jay Mascis of a little band called Dinosaur, better known as Dinosaur Jr., are playing together and are on SubPop. So it's an interesting tie-in. It floats in and out of their sphere. So let's get down to who SubPop are. What is SubPop Records? You think of SubPop Records, you think of bands like Postal Service, the Postal Service and the Shins. Here's a fact I thought was funny back in the day. The Postal Service had a Twitter before the American Postal Service did, and the Postal Service in America couldn't wrestle it out of their hands. You know what? That's the way it should be right there. I love it. So bureaucracy couldn't wrestle out the Twitter of one of America's most popular bands, which was signed to SubPop, and to this day is the best-selling SubPop record that has ever hit. Give Up by the Postal Service. Anyway, who's SubPop? So I'll read you their own description from their own site. SubPop is located at 2013 4th Avenue on the 3rd floor now of Seattle, Washington, but I remember their warehouse location. And I remember them on 2nd Avenue down by Pike Place. And I remember I took a business trip in, 2000. Went to Seattle. Got flown to Seattle. Check this out. I worked for Nordstrom. And I got flown to Seattle for training on this cosmetic line that hadn't hit in America. And I got to go visit SubPop in 2000. And it was just as they were closing, and somebody was locking the doors, and they were like, yeah, closed, man. By the way, we don't really like tourists. No kidding, because I asked the person who was locking the doors, I'm just here to see it. I'm just here to get a picture of it, to just prove that I was here. And they're like, yeah, there's a record store, and we have some offices here, but we're really not about the tourists. And they just a very world weary. I have no idea who I was talking to, but very world-weary employee of Sub Pop in 2000. Just a little aside. And then here's a little aside. That night, actually, I was in Seattle alone and didn't want to hang out with anyone who was on the trip with me. And so I just went to roam the streets of Seattle alone and ran into a guy who was there from Ireland to try and discover the Seattle sound and coffee and see if there was see if he could tour the bars and drink some micro brews. No kidding. And he was very bored as well. And he said, "So where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I flew here for a training meeting from Denver." And he was the only person that I ran into in Seattle at that point who didn't say, "Denver? Figures." Seriously, that was the answer I got the entire business trip. Denver? Figures. And it's perceived that Denver was such a bigger town than Seattle by people in Seattle. But trust me, it wasn't. Weirdly. And you hear that on some of these interviews with the Sub Pop people, that Denver was seen as such a bigger thing. And they really was not that kind of town. Anyway, so me and this Irish guy, he was like, "You know who's playing tonight? Here's this historic theater down on I believe it was Pine Street. It might have been Pine Street Theater. I don't know. I remember I was down there. It was all lit up, and I went to go see Lady Keir Kirby and DJ Toa Tay playing together. It wasn't D-Light, but all the D-Light people were there. And it was really cool. I got to meet Lady Keir Kirby and Toa Tay, and it was really awesome. And I had an awesome night. And I got to go to Urban Outfitters for the first time, who ran an all-night store in Seattle. And I was intrigued by that. We went down the street to Urban Outfitters. Anyway, that was my fun 2000 in Seattle story. But I will read you what Sub Pop Records says about themselves. That's just my personal connection to it. So Sub Pop themselves say on their site, founded by Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman in 1988. And can I just say as an aside, if I had a boss named Jonathan Poneman, I'd never quit. Anyway, they say they were founded in 1988. Sub Pop Records is a medium-sized independent record label based in Seattle, Washington, with early releases by Nirvana, Mudhoney, Soundgarden, and Tad. And in other interviews, to wit, they used to refer to Sub Pop Records as the house Mudhoney built. Interesting, right? Anyway, to go on, the label's often associated with something called the grunge movement. Exploitation of this association has frequently proven to be financially fruitful. Later years saw record album releases from such moderately to somewhat well-known artists as Sabadoa, Sunny Day Real Estate, the Murder City Devils, the Shins, Iron and Wine, the Postal Service, Band of Horses, Flight of the Conchords, Fleet Foxes, Slater-Kinney, Beach House, Washed Out, Shabazz Palaces, The Head and the Heart, Ways Blood, and Father John Misty, among very many other talented and deserving artists, whose managers will be contacting us shortly about inclusion in the preceding list. I find that a charming caveat. Not content to rest on its laurels, with that deeply impressive roster of talent, Sub Pop has also boldly stumbled into the realm of fully intentional comedy, with releases by David Cross, Patton Oswalt, Flight of the Conchords, Eugene Merman, John Benjamin, Sarah Silverman, and soundtracks from Bob's Burgers and Rick and Morty. At Sub Pop Records, it is our intent to market and sell the recorded music and related merchandise of artists whose music some shifting definition of we really and truly love. We mean to represent these artists as faithfully and diligently as possible and hold out hope that this is enough for us to remain solvent in the face of the well-documented collapse of the music industry at large. We also enjoy laughter, good times, and the company of good friends. Sub Pop Records acknowledges the land on which we live and work today. I believe this is super important here. Sub Pop Records acknowledges the land on which we live and work today as the traditional home of the Coast Salish people, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We thank the original caretakers of this land, past, present, and future. God, how important is that? And how many labels do you hear say that? Well, this one. That's it. And I think that's really wonderful. To go on, there's a Wikipedia article that illuminates it just a little bit more for you here. Because you wonder, where did Sub Pop come from? How did they start as a label? Well, I'll read it off to you. The origins of, this is from Wikipedia, by the way. The origins of Sub Pop can be traced back to the early 80s, when Bruce Pavitt started a fanzine called Subterranean Pop. And yeah, it was a zine. And I think that's fantastic. You know, and if you're not hip to this, back in the day when there wasn't an internet, there were zines. And people would photocopy and do all sorts of like collage and put it together into this little folded, you know, usually 6 to 30 page little packet with that whatever logo on the front, so you know what you're reading. And they were all about music and all about scenes and happenings. And so Sub Pop was a zine, and it was called Subterranean Pop, focused exclusively on American independent record labels. Note that was like 1981, 82, something like that. During the days when 4AD was king. Yeah. Pavitt undertook the project in order to earn course credit while attending Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. Note that's still, Evergreen College is amazing. It's free to attend. Yeah, if you can get in. And it's an art school. What a fantastic concept, right? Still exists, still going. By the 4th issue, Pavitt had shortened the name to Sub Pop and began alternating issues with compilation tapes of underground rock bands. The Sub Pop number 5 cassette, released in 1982, sold 2,000 copies. In 1983, Pavitt moved to Seattle, Washington, and released the 9th and final issue of Sub Pop. 1983, the 9th and final issue. Just as a comparison, 1983, the New Romantic movement was going strong. 4AD were the kings of alternative music, in the UK at least, and everybody in America was clamoring for it. And in 1983, things were really, really underground. That Seattle sound was unknown. Everybody was just like, oh yeah, Pacific Northwest, that's where lumberjacks live. So it wasn't a place that anybody knew about in 1983. In 1983, Pavitt moved to Seattle, Washington, and released the 9th and final issue of Sub Pop, While in Seattle, he wrote a column for a local newspaper, The Rocket, entitled SubPop USA, a column he ended in 1988. That's the incidental year that SubPop says that they were incorporated and became a label. In 1986, Pavitt released the first SubPop LP, the compilation SubPop 100, which featured material artists like Sonic Youth, Naked Raygun, Wipers, and Scratch Acid. Seattle group Green River chose to record their Dry as a Bone EP for Pavitt's new label in June 1986. Pavitt couldn't afford to release it until the following year. When finally released, Dry as a Bone was promoted by SubPop as an ultra-loose grunge that destroyed the morals of a generation. So there's your first attestation of the word grunge. Also in 1987, Jonathan Poneman provided $20,000 in funding for SubPop to release the debut Soundgarden single, Hunted Down / Nothing to Say. In July of 1987, followed by the band's first EP, Screaming Life, that October. Poneman soon became a full partner in the label. Pavitt focused closely on the label's artists and repertoire aspects, while Poneman dealt with the business and legal issues. Both men decided they wanted the label to focus on this primal rock stuff that was coming out, according to Pavitt. So let's actually hear from the people of SubPop about SubPop. So this is a sound exchange recording of an interview that they did, and I am looking to get all the names for you, because as much as I want to be like the giant of remembering things, I am not. My brain is a broken piece of brain. So, SubPop Records, an independent giant, Declarations of Independence by Sound Exchange. They describe it as a mini documentary chronicling the history and relevance of one of the music industry's most successful